We're on Chapter 7. My name is Jon Eric. I'll be hosting, joined by my lovely wife, Allyson, who is a distraught Google Reader user, and our good friend, Emily Lind, who is not as smart as Veronica Mars, but we're glad to have her here anyway. So, Chapter 7. We're halfway done. Isn't that weird?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
This is the 6th of these hangouts we're doing out of 12 for this first season. I thought it was interesting that, in spite of the episodes all being titled chapter number, that this seemed like the first time in the series that an actual chapter was closed, when this bill that kicked off all the action finally got signed. Did you guys feel like this was a structural turning point for the show?
I thought it was interesting to open the show on that ending, and it obviously wasn't the same, but it called back to me the opening of Chapter 2, where he's finishing his meal in the barbecue restaurant and going on. But definitely a lot more finite. It was interesting to me that they opened on something ending rather than a cold start of something new.
I like that, though. I like that the beginning of the episode is ending something, and then the rest of the episode is build up to I guess the next chapter. I don't want to say, but I think it's an interesting way to build a story, and it is unusual, but I actually ended up really liking the structure of that.
Yeah, I thought it was really effective, especially because this show we're only on the 7th episode, but we've already seen them establish a penchant for setting up these great big set pieces, like the interview last week, and this week, all the montage of all the setup that goes into the bill signing, including the setting up of the chairs and the laying out of the pens and the place markers, which Vice President Matthews completely ignores and bulldozes over. This is the episode where we really get to see Matthews getting frustrated. And I'm wondering, this is probably the most we've gotten of that character so far in the series. Now that the frustration about this bill is over, we're kind of getting a chance for the show to expand its scope and focus on some of these characters who have been on the peripheral so far. What did you guys think of Matthews in this episode?
It's interesting because in some ways it's sort of like, oh my goodness, you're being such a little kid about this. On the other hand, it's like, well, he's also the vice president and being treated in a way where, like, even I guess it was a staffer who's just like, we're going to need you to stand on your mark. Like, you never say that you certainly never say it to the president. And so the idea that you could say that to the vice president and expect him to do it, like, it made his frustration, even though it seems petty, to be sort of understandable.
Yeah.
All right.
Go ahead, Allyson.
Oh, no, I was just agreeing.
Okay. I thought that really came to a head at that scene near the end where Matthews sneaks into the Oval Office and sits at the desk. And it's this quiet little scene. There's no dialogue in it. He just goes in there, sits at the desk, smiles to himself a little bit, steals the pen. It speaks volumes about why he's so frustrated in his current position. He's being kept out of the loop. He went for vice president because it was supposed to be a position of power, and it's nominally the second most powerful position there is. But in fact, it's a lot more defanged than being governor of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I don't know. I sort of like, he's all frustrated, and I get that he's frustrated, but part of me is like, what were you expecting? I know absolutely nothing about politics, but I know that the vice president kind of doesn't have much.
And hey, you know what? President Walker ever goes in for an operation or anything,
Yeah.
then he would get to sit at that Oval Office for real for like an hour.
Yeah.
We had President Cheney for about 3 hours. It happened.
Yeah.
I think maybe it's that he, while knowing that the vice president, like as a position, isn't necessarily one of power, maybe he wasn't expecting to be cut out as much as he was.
That's true.
Because there are definitely VPs in our own history who've had more influential roles with their president than Matthews does.
Gore comes to mind. Definitely, and part of that is Underwood being a manipulative a-hole, because he's intentionally cutting Matthews out of certain things that he should be a part of, like the discussion about who they're going to run for governor. We see him getting especially frustrated about that, but of course it's intentional. Underwood knew that Matthews would shoot down any mention of Peter Russo if he let Matthews in on that discussion. We get one of those conversations that by now is routine, where he goes, "Oh, I thought they would have brought you in on that." Of course, he's lying to his face.
Yeah.
At this point, we don't even bat an eyelash, right?
Nope.
No.
Excuse me. So, obviously we haven't seen the last of President Walker, and we haven't seen the last of Vice President Matthews yet. But I agree with Emily. It was difficult to figure out how I felt about him, because I do understand that he's being shut out, and I do understand that's really frustrating for him. But I also I agree, he's acting like a child, and it's really hard to sympathize. That's frustrating. I feel like I have a much better handle on how I feel about any other character on the show.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And of course, like even Walker. I mean, I don't like President Walker, but I know right off the bat, oh, this guy's ridiculous.
Yeah.
My knee-jerk reaction is, oh my God, it's Captain Boring. With Matthews, I don't really know. I don't know. Well, I guess we can talk more about him in later episodes, but right now they've done a lot of the heavy lifting in this episode that it's going to motivate the things we're going to see him do later. And we've all finished the first season at this point, so no spoilers, but we know.
Oh.
Now, so why don't we move on then? This is, how I said I hardly ever have anything good to say about Peter Russo. It's like I feel in my opinion, he is the most compelling character. This is the first episode so far where we've really had oh yeah, all right, now he's in. Now we've got stuff to talk about with him. I loved that scene. It's the first scene in Underwood's basement where they're all talking strategy.
I love that scene.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So brilliantly realized, because everybody is talking about their strategy for the campaign, and Russo is sitting there on that sofa, not saying a word. The scene goes on for over a minute before he gets a line.
The slow zoom into him sitting there like a lost little boy.
And you can see him squirming. Every time they talk about his past, every time they talk about something he's not comfortable with, you just see him go.
Yeah.
And then they finally ask him a question, and it switches to a POV shot, and everybody is just staring at him. The director of this episode is Charles McDougall. That was really sharp work on his part.
I think it's one of the most cinematic shots we've seen in this show so far.
Yeah.
Which is saying a lot, considering David Fincher directed 2 of the episodes.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's more understated, but it's right up there with the swearing in scene. Who do you see right off to the side? Um, Also, contrast that with the second basement scene later on.
Oh, God.
Actually, I'm sorry, it's not the second basement scene. It is the one later on, right after he's talked with Christina. When he comes down the steps, everybody shuts up. And they're all looking at him, waiting for him to speak to them. And when he does, it's a comfortable, he's setting the rules, and the camera's a nice little mid-shot. Really strong work to establish an arc where Russo sort of assumes control of his own ship. I think part of that establishes sympathy on our part for him, which contributes to this sense that I've had that he's the guy that we're following. Do you guys think he's even upstaging Underwood a little?
I think in this episode maybe a little, but I don't know how much that is my own sympathy for the character, or even that, like, within the show,
Yeah.
Frank needs him to do that. He needs Peter to
be the guy
think that he's the guy that everybody's listening to.
Yeah. It's a good point. I'm curious, especially in light of things that we know are going to happen later, the extent to which the writers are aware that of how much more compelling Russo is than most of the other characters. I'm not sure if it's something that they've intended to use to their advantage, or if he's the breakout character and they never had that audience feedback, so they never got to react accordingly.
Well, that is sort of an interesting point. I mean, at least in American broadcast television, we're used to shows being not even necessarily more than a couple of episodes ahead, depending on their shooting schedule.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot more shift that can happen.
Yeah, and there's a lot of interaction with the audience. Major examples I know of. I mean, the only reason James Marsters came back to Buffy was because people loved him, and they reacted really positively, and they asked Whedon to write him back in. The only reason Nikki and Paolo didn't last very long on Lost was because every time they had a scene, the audience members would go onto forums and go, "Oh my God, these people."
Well, and like originally on The West Wing, Martin Sheen was going to be on a couple times a season, and it was going to be about the staffers. And that significantly changed to the point of Rob Lowe leaving the show. But I don't know. So it's sort of, I mean, in some ways, it's weird because in some ways I like shows going the direction their writers wanted them to go from the beginning. But on the other hand, like, I really like this character, and it would have been interesting to see if there would have been any changes, considering how compelling that character is.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
So, I mean, it is the other edge of that sword that Netflix is experimenting with. You know, they release everything all at once so that we get to binge on it, and they get to say that they're this new wave of how television is going to work, which may also be contributing to the fact that there's only 3 of us in here because, you know, it's not a huge event anymore. It was 7 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, the downside is that the creators don't get to have this interplay with the audience.
And it's not even necessarily just, like, you can't necessarily let the audience dictate what you're going to do, but, you know, as a writer, how many times have you sat down to write a story or something and have it go exactly the way you thought it would?
That's true.
You know, stuff, especially stuff that runs a long time. It evolves into ways you wouldn't have imagined before until you get really into the world and really into the characters. Like we said Buffy, and like I don't think Buffy would be Buffy without Spike.
Yeah, I was just thinking, in Battlestar Galactica, originally Hilo was only supposed to be in the miniseries, and I'm like, if you don't have the Hilo and Athena falling in love story, I don't know what that show is anymore.
Yeah, I know. Totally.
Anyway, now we're really off track. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
It's okay. I'm all in favor of using other TV shows as a point of comparison because they're all the context we have, really.
Yeah. It is interesting that just the way they released it doesn't necessarily... You know, I'm sure their script and their story arc probably did change, but it doesn't necessarily allow for the sort of dynamic change that will happen to a TV show over time.
And it'll also be interesting to see what happens with Season 2, whether or not they take any of the things that people have said about Season 1 and try to build on that. Lots of speculation we can do. We'll probably save that for the 12th and final hangout.
Since we're talking about Peter, can we talk about that scene when he's going through his list of all this stuff he's done? Because it's like, even knowing he's an addict, like, my jaw was on the floor. I mean, it's an insane, like...
Oh, 10 or 15 women.
In 2 weeks in Thailand!
I did heroin once.
It's like My Name is Earl, but less funny.
Yeah, a little bit. Oh, man. Now I'm picturing Russo going around Thailand with a list.
But, when you find out they had his first drink when he was 9, handed to him by his dad, you go, oh, yeah, that's why.
Yeah.
And, next week we're going to see him back in Philly.
Yeah, that explains a lot as well.
That's going to tell us almost everything we need to know. But, yeah, that almost seemed kind of Breakfast Club to me. Like, you know what I got for my birthday? Pack a cigarette.
I don't know. I had my first drink when I was 3, and that sure as hell kept me from drinking for a long time.
Oh, yeah. So, but yeah, it really does explain a lot about how bad he's gotten and who he is and why he's having such trouble with self-control. Case in point, look at how uncomfortable he gets. When he's getting grilled by, I don't even think that character has a name, the guy who does the vetting.
If he does, I didn't catch it.
Yeah, but I know I wrote something down. Oh, yeah, what does it say about him that he starts interpreting all these questions as accusations?
Guilty conscience?
I think so. I think it's not uncommon addict behavior, especially for someone who's just getting into recovery and still sort of coming to terms with it himself.
Fair enough.
Oh, alcohol, like addicts in general can get very defensive about their behaviors. That's for sure.
And also, I think if you sit there listing all the stuff you've done, then you sort of realize just how bad it is. Because if you're just taking it one thing at a time, like one drunken mistake here, one drunken mistake there, but when you're sitting down making them accountable to somebody else,
yeah,
I think maybe you start to flip out a little bit.
Yeah.
Especially when you want something like this governorship that he knows is going to be extremely difficult given what he's done.
Yeah, that's true. The one other aspect of Russo I found really interesting here, and this kind of dovetails into the addiction thing, is the show trying to make a statement by making him an atheist?
I feel like there are probably more atheists in Washington than we actually realize.
I sort of felt it was only mentioned so when we see that interview later and he talks about finding his faith again, that, and because here's the thing, that interview, like, I've talked a lot about how much I love this character. He lies throughout that entire interview.
Oh, yeah.
Like, quite blatantly.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I think that's just another part of it. Like, that's how it felt to me. It was, I mean, it does give some, like, more background to his character, but also I think it's just one more thing that he can't tell the truth about.
It's true, and that's probably a great deal of pressure on his shoulders, because I'm conflicted. It's like a couple weeks ago when somebody remarked that he hadn't even written the bill that he is claiming to be the architect of. Underwood hadn't written that bill.
Right.
And for me, that hadn't even registered until she said it, because it was like, but that's just how Washington works, right? It's the same thing here. Like, it almost didn't register for me that their whole strategy is being honest about all the skeletons in his closet, and then they still hide most of them.
Well, yeah, their strategy is be honest with us about everything that's going on, so we know what you have to lie about to the public.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I mean, just that understated, I've highlighted the suggestions, the things I think you should admit to. The rest you probably shouldn't mention. Which isn't like, the rest is the stuff I think you can get away with, is basically what he's saying there.
Yeah.
So, and you know, if we're gonna talk about Russo, we should probably also talk about Christina.
Yeah.
Now, she's not there to be a crutch for him, but she is there to be somebody other than Underwood telling Russo that she believes in him. Do you buy that logic for a second?
No.
I feel so bad for her. Because, what do you do in that situation? I mean, even if you think, like, if you realize that you're being a crutch, maybe he needs one. Like, especially if it's a guy you're in love with who you want to see get better.
Do you think do you think she thinks that this campaign and potentially being governor will keep him clean?
I think she hopes it will.
I hate to think she's that naive.
I think maybe she hasn't been let down by him enough yet.
You have to leave him once.
Once?
It's so, the addiction thing is so hard because she also sees who she wants him to be and who she thinks he can be, and she wants to think that she can help him be that. I think she's smart enough to know deep down that that's not works. But it's still gotta be really hard to walk away from.
Sure, I mean, emotional entanglements with addicts are never easy. They're never simple.
No.
They're never cut and dried.
And correct me if I'm wrong, he's fudging when he says he's been sober a little over a year, right?
We saw him doing like 6 months ago.
I know, but I get confused with how the chronology works episode to episode.
It's not...
It hasn't been a year.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, he
There's
should
no
not...
formula, but each episode has been about a month.
Yeah, no, he should not be in a relationship right now. You're supposed to avoid romantic relationships for at least a year.
Now, I think I've only actually known one person in AA. But it seems to me like that's a rule that gets overlooked pretty frequently and casually.
Well, yes, but that doesn't mean it's not a rule. And it's there for a reason. Just because everyone ignores it doesn't mean it's not, I don't know, useful.
Well, and that's the other thing. I mean, or maybe it isn't. I don't know. Do you think do you think Underwood intended for her to go back to his apartment and shag his brains out right after the session, or do you
Maybe
think
not that night.
I don't know. I mean, it's sort of how much emotional support he thought she was going to provide. I mean,
she's there for moral
I
support,
think he
emotional
certainly
support, and
didn't-
genital support.
I mean, he certainly
They have
wouldn't
cups
have
for that.
discounted that possibility.
And that's as much as we know that he's not supposed to be getting involved with anybody while he's on this path to recovery, and as much as we know that it's probably not even a good idea for her, that scene where she comes in and they start kissing.
I like them together.
I was really happy both times I watched that scene, even though I shouldn't have been.
Or maybe I just thought that it was a romantic scene because it comes right after the really terrible kiss between Lucas and...
Oh, God. Oh.
Saw how I segued that? That was really cool, right?
I had sort of forgot that Lucas existed.
Yeah, me
Yeah,
too.
me too.
I saw him and it was like, should I know him? Oh, right, that dude who
Yeah.
didn't do anything before. Didn't really do anything just now either, except that reminded us that he still exists. Cause,
Yeah.
Cause,
And it's
I wonder if he's
creepy
gonna
and
come
weird.
back later. So, why? That's all I have to say. This is what I wrote on in my notes. The return of Lucas. Why?
So the reader will so Frank will have an obvious reason to think she's keeping secrets from him.
And also to set up when the rest of the season. But I feel almost that we needed to see him a little bit in some episodes before this. Even just watching her on TV or something. Because it's just oh yeah, all of a sudden this guy who we haven't seen for a while is drunkenly stalking her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I seriously didn't even register him as a character. I thought he was just one of those people in the first couple of episodes who was there because if he wasn't there, the Washington Herald would have looked empty.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Well, and yeah, he was her sounding board or whatever, and he was, he was not the hardcore evil Twitter twat, but he was sort of he was a little mellower version of that,
Yeah, I guess.
Honestly, if he hadn't been in the rest, if he hadn't been on the show again, I wouldn't have ever thought, oh, I wonder what happened to that
Yeah,
character.
exactly.
Yeah, me neither.
And I certainly didn't. I don't know what to make of this drunken, pinned her against the wall and kissed her.
Why didn't she kick him in the balls? That's what I want to know. No, really, why didn't she? Because quite honestly, that's what I would have done worse. But
Yeah, I generally don't like drunken guys, especially drunken guys that I'm not in a relationship with, just coming up to me on the street and groping me. I think that's
me
a bad
neither.
thing to do.
There are ways to get around that.
Maybe she actually does have some latent feelings for him. I don't.
Oh, but that was a gross kiss.
Well, it was.
She could not have enjoyed, even in the happiest fictional realm, she could not have enjoyed that. I'm sorry.
If somebody is drunkenly kissing you, you really want to be drunk as well, because otherwise...
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. But it does set up this weird pseudo-jealousy dynamic between her and Underwood. So Underwood thinks that she's lying to him when he goes up to her apartment. And he knows that she's lying to her dad.
Damn it, I hate this scene so much.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I hate that scene too.
It wouldn't be really an adequate discussion of this episode if we didn't at least mention it. It makes us all very uncomfortable, I know.
My notes are all in capitals and have about 20 exclamation marks after them.
I didn't even write a question or anything for that scene. All I know, I just need to point at it and go, so what just happened?
Okay, there's so much creepiness going on in this scene. Okay, first of all, don't have sex with somebody while you're on the phone with your dad.
Yeah, exactly.
That's gross. It is epically disturbing, but then it becomes, I think, one of the most disturbing things I've ever heard on a TV show, which is her saying to him, "You don't have any children," and him saying, "Don't I?"
Yeah.
Sally's screwing her.
Yeah.
What was that?
What did that even mean?
It's gross.
I don't even... Hang on.
In the absolute least creepy way you could possibly construe it, and even then that's not saying much, it's that he's totally been screwing around Washington, and he assumes he might have an illegitimate kid somewhere.
But what it's actually
But even then, that's like the least creepy way you could put it, and that's not so great.
And also, it's not what it is, which is, it's completely playing on the age dynamic and the weird father issue she has.
Wow.
And it's so wrong. Ugh. And it might have ruined Kevin Spacey for me.
Sorry, keep going. I need to step away for a second.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that could ruin Kevin Spacey for me, but it was pretty disturbing.
Well, I've always had a crush on Kevin Spacey, and then I'm like, I can't. Oh, shoot. Like, that was... The idea of being on the...
that she has daddy issues, just other instead of general 20-something anti-parent rebellion issues. Like, I really don't... Nothing about her seems to me to say daddy issues. Like, sleeping with a guy twice your age, to me, does not conflate with daddy issues. But maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's not quite the right word for it, especially because their phone conversation, I mean, despite, if you ignore everything else that's going on,
Yes.
Their phone conversation seemed like a fairly normal, not particularly close with your dad, but you love him sort of conversation.
Yeah. You know, I've had the "when are you coming home? I don't know" conversation often.
Yeah, but just the idea of being on the phone with one of my parents, if a guy did that, we would instantly be done.
Yeah. Instantly.
Because that's so, like, what? Like, I can't even comprehend that.
Okay. Agreed on every count. Just... Oh, God. Now, I hadn't been fully comfortable with how sexualized their relationship had been already. And that just pushed it over the top for me. I think I had mentioned at some point earlier that I thought they were making Kate Mara up to look even younger than she's supposed to. Which has the effect of emphasizing the age difference between these two characters. And
how old is Frank supposed to be?
It's not said. I think he's probably in his mid-50s.
Yeah, that's, I feel like.
Okay.
Might be 60.
Oh, I don't think that. His hair is too colored.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I honestly, like, their age difference is, like, the very low on my list of, like...
Yeah, me too.
Like,
Yeah.
that just... Yeah.
It's the age difference, it's the power dynamic.
The power dynamic is a big issue. And the creepifyingness of that sex scene is a huge
Oh
issue.
god, yeah.
Have we gotten to the quote about sex and power yet? It's inconsequential. If it hasn't happened yet, I don't. It's
I don't think
inconsequential. There's a quote where everything in Washington is about sex, except for sex. Sex is about.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think we've gotten there yet, but that's an important thing to keep in mind, because sex is about power for these two, and they passive aggressively banter back and forth about it, and then talk about it like it's no big deal. Now, in the first scene in Zoe's apartment this episode, Underwood says that Meacham would never go for her. He says, "You're too intimidating." Now, I mean, aside from just the fact that they're just flirting and saying silly things, is she?
No.
I don't think so.
I mean, she's not physically imposing.
Oh, certainly not.
I guess she's a force to be reckoned with via the internet,
Yeah.
and that can pose problems.
The same reason Taylor Swift is intimidating, but
Oh.
never mind. Now I'm going to hell, right?
Don't worry, Tina Fey's beat you there.
Oh, awesome. Can't wait to go to a hell with Tina Fey in it.
At least Amy Poehler will be there.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. That was... now we're really getting sidetracked. So, I mean, is that what's intimidating about her? Is that the implication that she has this army of internet followers and she has this influence because of her journalistic position?
Well, I sort of get it in so much as... I mean, she did show up at Frank's door for that first, story. She is willing to go after what she wants.
Mm-hmm.
She is, and, how she played when she got called a cunt. She definitely has... I mean, it's difficult when we see her with Frank because, again, the power dynamic there is very skewed. But I think away from him, I could see how she could be intimidating.
Yeah, that's fair. And we also see some of the other the aspect of her where she's kind of learning some of Frank's tricks, where Frank asks a favor and she outsources it. She goes way out of her way to get this story off of her plate by bringing in what's her name?
Whose name I can never remember.
Jeanette?
Yeah? I don't know.
Possibly.
We're terrible. Janine. By bringing in Janine just to write this one thing that Frank told her to write that she doesn't want in her own name. By getting her hired at Slugline just to do this.
By the way, I really hate that name a lot. Slugline. It's horrible. It's really a terrible name for a website.
Well, the good Politico was taken. What do you do?
Yeah.
And I'm sure if they had tried to name it something like the Bluffington Post...
that'd be more distracting. But every time I hear it, I wince a little bit.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Anyway, and by the way, that's a really good piece of plotting. Bringing in Lucas out of the blue is really awkward, and we've discussed that a little bit. But bringing Janine back into the fold turns out to be a really elegant way to accomplish the exact same thing. We're going to see this in coming episodes, and if you're watching this and you haven't paid attention so far, that's something to keep an eye on.
I thought it was good. It's a good way to bring that character back. And like you mentioned, it's sort of showing her learning from Frank, this bestowing of favors on people is, I mean, that's such a big part of everything that Frank does, that seeing her do it is a turning point for that character, I think, in terms of what she's learning.
That's a good point.
Definitely.
He makes that explicit to her. He says, he actually outright says, doing favors is an act of power. It's counterintuitive, but you can take while appearing to give. Which I think is a nice button on where she's at in the plot right now. We're at 40 minutes. I try to keep these between 40 and 50, and we haven't talked at all about Stamper and Rachel yet.
Man, he becomes a much more interesting character in this episode.
Doesn't he?
I found their interaction almost, but not quite as disturbing as that Frank and Zoe sex scene.
Disturbing, but not unrealistic.
No, but I think that's what made it so disturbing. I just found it just extremely upsetting.
You mean like the utter defeat with which she starts to take off her sweatshirt when the money's on the table?
Yeah.
Yeah. Heartstrings, man. That's like, wow. But at the same time, this is a character who, the first time he really got to make an impression on us was when he exerted an act of sexual power over this exact character. And now he gets to show some dimension as a character by declining to do the exact same thing.
I just thought it was fascinating because when he first gets that note, I thought, oh, this is going to go in some really scary places. And it sort of went into a very different place where he's genuinely sympathetic to her, I think.
He really
now
is.
there is the the weird like saving the call girl sort of like hero cliche thing. But I genuinely think that he feels badly about this and wants to actually be able to help her. Like, not that he wouldn't go to extremes if she forced him to go in that direction, but if he can solve this and help her, that's what he wants to do.
Right.
It's true, and he actually pulls in political favors to help this girl out.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is... I'm not sure what to make of that just yet. I mean, I don't know, was the reason he was willing to basically lord over her in the first place basically because she didn't seem vulnerable before?
I can see that.
I can see that. To be honest, and as much as I like most of what this show does, I feel like a lot of that was so you could have that note where it says, like, and not in my mouth this time, and automatically know exactly what's going on. Because that scene makes such an impression. Because I have a very hard time reconciling that scene with the Stamper we see in this episode.
Yeah, that's kind of why I keep harping on that. I'm not sure how to do that yet either, and I can tell that this story is not yet over. Notwithstanding that I've already watched through I knew at this point in the first viewing that this story is not yet over. And I guess we just have to keep watching and see how this character develops as he continues, because I admit I'm also having a difficult time getting a read on him. I've had a difficult time getting a read on him this whole time.
I think it's interesting that this episode where we see him with Rachel is also this episode where he's talking in AA about how he uses fear to get people to do what he wants. And how willing he is to do that. And that sort of bit at the end where it's like he uses it against other people but also himself. This idea of being so scared of what you could do.
Yeah.
And that's how he controls it.
Absolutely. It's a really good point. And I glossed over that, but that was a really good speech, and I wanted to. The thought crossed my mind, but I guess I never wrote it down. I wanted to mention the extent to which that's an act of self-revelation for the group, but it's also a performance for his sponsee,
Mm-hmm.
and it's also a show of force in and of itself. That speech works on a lot of levels, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, here's the thing with that character is, I don't even know if he's actually an alcoholic.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're right.
I mean, because, like, honestly, that's because the scene, it was last episode, right? Where Frank says to Peter, "You're going to AA, and Stamper's going to be your sponsor."
Yeah.
And I'm sort of like, I just sort of assumed that was a lie. But I don't know. I genuinely don't know.
It's true, and now I'm trying to think back. Have we seen him drink?
I don't think so. But I'm not.
I mean, he doesn't.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the fundraiser episode. I'm like, was he drinking there? I don't know.
Now I'm gonna have to go back and watch all these a third time. I don't. I just don't know. He's tough to get a read on, man. It's tough.
It's a good role. I really like this episode because it's sort of a role that's been in the periphery, and I've liked him when I've seen him because he's a compelling actor. But this episode really made him a character in his own right.
Yeah. I dig it. Were there any other topics I didn't address? Was there anything else you guys had a hole burning in your pocket to talk about?
I think that's about it for me.
Yeah, me too.
All right. We're right about time, so I'll go ahead and call it. Hey, this has been a great discussion on Chapter 7. We are at the halfway point. 6 more to go. For Geeks of the Round, I'm Jon Eric. This is Allyson, Whipple, and Emily Lind saying goodnight, and we'll see you next Wednesday.